They were too young to kill, or so everyone thought. In quiet neighborhoods, on playgrounds, and in classrooms, some of the most unthinkable crimes in history were committed by children, some as young as 10. These weren't troubled teens caught in gang violence or drug wars. These were children who played with toys, watched cartoons, and still had baby teeth. And yet, they killed. The question that haunts every parent, every teacher, every neighbor is, why? Take the case of Mary Bell. In 1968, in Newcastle, England, Mary was just 11 years old when she strangled two young boys. One just 4 years old, the other 3. She had a history of abuse and neglect, but what chilled investigators wasn't just the act itself, but her apparent lack of remorse. At the scene of one murder, she left a chilling note that read, "I murder so that I may come back." She was a child herself, yet her actions, and her words, left the country stunned. It's cases like Mary's that reveal the eerie disconnect between appearance and reality. Children are supposed to be innocent, incapable of such brutality. But time and again, headlines prove otherwise. One of the most disturbing and widely publicized cases is that of John Venables and Robert Thompson. In 1993, these two 10-year-old boys abducted, tortured, and murdered 2-year-old James Bulger in Liverpool. CCTV footage captured the boys leading James away from a shopping center. Hours later, his body was found by a railway line, showing signs of prolonged abuse. The public could barely comprehend it. How could children do something so cruel? The trial sparked national outrage. The boys were tried in an adult court, which itself became a major controversy. Protesters demanded life sentences. The media painted them as monsters. But behind the frenzy was a darker question that no one could shake. Were they born evil or made that way? Psychologists who studied the case pointed to a mix of emotional disturbance, possible trauma, and desensitization to violence. But answers were elusive. The only certainty was the chilling fact: children were capable of calculated, sadistic murder. In the United States, the story of Eric Smith added another twist. In 1993, the same year as the Bulger case, 13-year-old Smith lured 4-year-old Derek Roby into the woods in rural New York and beat him to death with a rock. Eric had no criminal record, no history of violence. He was a red-haired, freckled kid bullied by peers. But something in him snapped. What ties these cases together isn't just the horror of the crimes, but the horror of the perpetrator's age. These aren't just shocking stories. They're deeply unsettling because they violate the societal rule that children are supposed to be innocent. The media often focuses on the act itself, what was done, how it was done, how gruesome it was. But in the background is something more disturbing. The idea that these kids could be sitting in a classroom next to yours, that they might live across the street, that you could smile at them on your morning walk and never suspect the darkness they're hiding. This chapter opens the door into a hidden world where innocence is only skin deep. Over the next chapters, we'll explore more cases, dissect the psychological profiles, and ask the difficult questions. Can these children ever be rehabilitated? Should they be treated as adults? And what can we learn to prevent the next tragedy? Because behind every child who kills is a story, and behind every story is a society that failed to see it coming. Not all child killers look disturbed. In fact, most of them don't. They laugh with their friends, smile in school photos, and hug their parents goodnight. But beneath that surface, something darker brews. Anger, jealousy, trauma, or a terrifying lack of empathy. And the world doesn't realize it until it's far too late. Take the case of Joshua Phillips. In 1998, 14-year-old Joshua lived in a quiet Jacksonville neighborhood in Florida. By all accounts, he was a typical teenager, shy, good in school, no known behavioral issues. But when 8-year-old Maddie Clifton disappeared from the neighborhood, the entire community launched a frantic search. For days, no one suspected that her body was hidden just feet away, beneath Joshua's waterbed. When police eventually searched his home, they found her battered remains concealed in his room. Joshua later confessed he had accidentally hit her in the eye with a baseball while playing, panicked, and dragged her inside. But the medical examiner's report told a different story. Maddie had been struck, stabbed, and suffocated, not once but repeatedly. What made Joshua's case stand out was not just the brutality, but the calmness he maintained in the days following the murder. He went to school. He helped search for her. He even comforted Maddie's family. The mask of innocence held firm until it shattered. Psychologists have long debated whether these types of children understand the weight of their crimes. Some argue that they do not fully comprehend death or permanence. Others believe that many know exactly what they're doing, but lack the emotional maturity to process consequences or empathy. The case of Lionel Tate raises similar questions. At just 12 years old, Lionel killed a 6-year-old girl he was babysitting by imitating wrestling moves. He claimed he didn't mean to hurt her, but the injuries she sustained were severe: skull fractures, internal bleeding, and more. Prosecutors treated it as second-degree murder. Lionel became the youngest person in the U.S. ever sentenced to life in prison without parole. His defense argued he didn't understand the impact of his actions. But again, the court had to decide: does age excuse intent? Does immaturity soften murder? While some kids kill in the heat of a moment or out of desperation, others appear coldly aware of what they're doing. Consider 12-year-old Christian Fernandez. In 2011, he was charged with the brutal beating of his 2-year-old brother. The boy later died from his injuries. Christian had a history of trauma. He was exposed to domestic violence, drug use, and abandonment. But his calm demeanor after the incident unnerved everyone. No tears, no panic, just a hollow stare. Cases like these force society to grapple with uncomfortable truths. It's easier to blame violent media, poor parenting, or mental illness. But none of those answers fully explain why some children cross the line into lethal violence while others, even in worse circumstances, do not. The truth is, there's no one cause, no single profile. Some child killers are driven by rage, others by jealousy. Some act out a fantasy, others just want to feel power. Many have suffered abuse themselves, perpetuating a tragic cycle. And some, perhaps the most terrifying, feel nothing at all. In 2001, Indiana was shocked by the case of 12-year-old Paul Gingrich. He helped his friend murder the friend's stepfather in cold blood. The boys had planned it in advance, even writing about it in school notebooks. When questioned, Paul showed little remorse, only fear that he would get caught. What makes these cases especially disturbing is not just that children kill, but that they can plan to kill. It's one thing to act in the heat of emotion. It's another to draw a blueprint. And yet, many of these kids looked and acted normal until the moment they didn't. That's what makes them so dangerous and so tragic. We like to believe we can spot evil, that it wears a certain face or talks a certain way. But when that evil comes with dimples and a backpack, it forces us to reconsider everything we think we know. As we move into the next chapter, we'll explore what happens after the crime. When these kids enter the justice system, what does society do with them? Do they go to juvenile centers, or are they treated as adults? And more importantly, can they ever be truly rehabilitated? When a child commits murder, the crime doesn't just shock a community, it rattles the justice system. Are these young killers victims themselves? Should they be given a second chance? Or are they too dangerous to ever walk free again? In courtrooms across the world, judges and juries are forced to weigh not just facts, but emotions, ethics, and public safety. And often, they do so in the face of tremendous media pressure and public outrage. Take the case of 13-year-old Nathaniel Brazel. In May 2000, Nathaniel was sent home early from school for throwing water balloons. Angry and embarrassed, he went home, retrieved a .25 caliber handgun, and returned to school. There, he shot and killed his English teacher, Barry Grunow. The shooting shocked West Palm Beach, Florida, and the entire nation. Nathaniel was tried as an adult and sentenced to 28 years in prison. His defense argued he acted impulsively. He didn't understand the consequences. He was just a boy. But the prosecution pointed to his actions, retrieving a gun, returning to the school, and aiming carefully, as signs of premeditation. The court agreed. And just like that, a 13-year-old became a convicted murderer. These are the moments that test the system's limits. When is a child no longer a child? In many U.S. states, children as young as 10 can be tried as adults, depending on the severity of the crime. But critics argue this approach ignores key science about brain development. Studies have repeatedly shown that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and understanding long-term consequences, isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. This means teens are more likely to act recklessly, misread social cues, and fall under peer pressure. Yet, many juvenile killers are locked away for life, some in adult prisons where they face abuse, isolation, and further psychological damage. Consider the case of Jordan Brown. In 2009, 11-year-old Jordan was accused of shooting his father's pregnant fiancée in the back of the head with a youth-sized shotgun while she slept. The motive? Jealousy and fear of being replaced in the family. Jordan denied involvement. The case dragged on for years. He spent time in juvenile detention, and debates raged over whether he should be tried as an adult. Eventually, in 2018, nearly a decade later, his conviction was overturned by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. He was declared innocent. The public response was mixed. Some felt justice had finally been served. Others were horrified at the possibility that a murderer had walked free. These legal battles highlight the ethical minefield courts must navigate. How do you balance accountability with the possibility of rehabilitation? A chilling example comes from the 1997 Parker Hume murder case in New Zealand. Pauline Parker and Juliet Hume, both 16, beat Parker's mother to death with a brick. Their reason? The mother was standing in the way of their friendship. The case shocked the nation. The girls were convicted but served only 5 years in prison. After their release, they assumed new identities. One of them, Juliet, later became best-selling crime novelist and Perry. This twist reignited debates about redemption. Can someone capable of horrific violence truly change? Rehabilitation programs for child offenders vary. Some focus on therapy, education, and structured environments. Others mimic adult prison systems, cold, punitive, and rigid. Success rates differ dramatically, and many former juvenile offenders relapse into crime as adults. Still, some argue that treating children like adults in the justice system only increases the risk of reoffending. It strips them of hope, ignores the root causes of their behavior, and labels them permanently as monsters. In Norway, the maximum prison sentence for minors, even for murder, is 15 years. Their system focuses on reintegration, not retribution. Critics say it's too soft. Supporters say it's humane and evidence-based. The United States, meanwhile, remains divided. Some states have passed reforms raising the minimum age for adult prosecution. Others continue to push for harsh sentences in the name of justice. But perhaps the biggest question is one no judge can answer. What happens when the system gets it wrong? What if the child didn't fully understand what they were doing? What if they were coerced, or abused, or mentally ill? And what if the person who seemed like a monster at 13 could have become something very different at 23, if given the chance? In the final chapter, we'll revisit the lives of child killers after their release or their sentencing. Where are they now? Have they re-entered society or disappeared into infamy? And most importantly, are they still dangerous? Because in the end, the scariest part of these stories might not be the crime itself, but what comes next. What becomes of a child who kills? It's the question that lingers long after the courtrooms clear, the headlines fade, and the victims are buried. Some of these young offenders vanish into the prison system. Others are quietly released under new names, monitored but free. And a few even rebuild their lives, hidden in plain sight. But for the public, the question always remains. Can a child who takes a life ever truly be redeemed? Take the case of John Venables, one of the two boys who murdered 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. After serving 8 years in a secure children's facility, John was released with a new identity. For a while, it seemed the system had worked, until he was arrested again in 2010 for possessing child pornography. Then again in 2017. Each time, the public erupted in anger. How could someone so dangerous be allowed back into society? His case became proof, for many, that some people are simply beyond saving. Contrast that with Mary Bell. After her release in 1980, she changed her name and began a new life. She became a mother, even won legal battles to keep her and her daughter's identities secret. She has reportedly lived quietly since. But the memory of her crimes, strangling 2 young boys before the age of 12, still haunts Britain. Then there are those who never got the chance to start over. Eric Smith, who murdered 4-year-old Derek Roby in 1993, was denied parole 10 times over nearly 3 decades. He was finally released in 2022. His family claimed he had changed, rehabilitated through therapy, education, and years of reflection. But for Derek's family and much of the public, it was too little, too late. The pain never left. What these stories reveal is the uncomfortable gray area we're left in when children kill. They are neither fully children nor fully monsters. They exist in between, complex, damaged, and terrifyingly human. Rehabilitation programs have had mixed success. Some juvenile offenders respond well to therapy and structured environments. They express genuine remorse. They go on to earn degrees, help others, and live quietly. Others reoffend or never escape the darkness that led them to kill in the first place. But the problem isn't just the kids. It's also the society that produced them. Many child murderers come from homes riddled with abuse, neglect, or mental illness. They're ignored, overlooked, or treated as burdens. By the time they act out violently, it's often too late. The warning signs were there. No one listened. This is the harshest truth of all. Some of these crimes could have been prevented. In over 75% of juvenile murder cases, there were red flags, violent behavior, threats, journal entries, social media posts. But teachers, parents, and peers either missed them or dismissed them. The challenge now is not just how to punish these children, but how to prevent the next one from becoming a killer. That means investing in mental health care, creating stronger school support systems, training adults to recognize early warning signs, and building environments where kids feel seen, safe, and valued. Because once a child takes a life, no one wins. Not the victim, not the killer, not society. So are these kids monsters? Or are they tragic mistakes, symptoms of a failing system? The truth may lie somewhere in between. But if we don't learn from these stories, we risk repeating them again and again. As you close this chapter, ask yourself, how many more children will we let slip through the cracks before we decide that prevention is more powerful than punishment? And how many more headlines will it take before we stop being shocked and start taking responsibility? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join our growing true crime community.